Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Dropping Down from the Rafters podcast here on Tone and Entertainment. It's the end of 2024 here. We are wrapping up our final podcast here on the channel for the year. And joining me for the 11th time this year as my co-host is Julie Cutler. How you doing, Julie?
I'm back. And Tony, thank you so much again, as always, for having me. I know you had mentioned that this is the 11th interview that we have done this year, which is really crazy to think about because I think we started doing these together probably, late 2023? So I think we only got to maybe a couple last year. I think we did maybe 3 interviews together.
Correct, because we just started the live podcast in September last year.
Yeah. And so I feel like we've been able to do a lot since then. And something that I really appreciate about doing this podcast is we bring on a lot of people that are just growing so much in the professional wrestling business. We bring in a lot of people that already have a lot of accomplishments under their belt, but they're still relatively early on in their careers where there's still a huge trajectory of growth and opportunities ahead of them. And so I'm really excited for our guest today because he's somebody who falls into that category. He's accomplished a lot at a very young age, and he still has many years ahead of him to accomplish a lot more. And so I'm excited to talk about some of what's to come in his future. So if I may, representing Randolph, Massachusetts, weighing in at 202 pounds, he is the best thing in wrestling, the alternative Anthony Greene.
Hey, I have to say that might be the best intro I've ever received for a podcast. So I'm glad of all the podcasts it or not responded to. I'm glad I chose to do this one, especially it's an honor to be the last one of the year.
I was going to say, Anthony, you're not getting introductions like that anywhere. I'm sorry.
No. We are definitely ending the year on a high note, and I feel like we got you at the perfect time, Anthony, because you have done a lot of traveling in recent times as part of Pro Wrestling Noah over in Japan, which you and I have talked about pretty extensively, your travels over there from both a wrestling standpoint as well as both from just like a cultural tourism standpoint. But let's take it way back to the beginning because I know that you started wrestling at a very young age from some of our previous conversations. So something that Tony and I always like to ask people about is just sort of, what got you into wrestling in the first place? Were you a wrestling fan growing up, or was there something that happened perhaps at a young age that inspired you to start your journey?
So I have been a fan of wrestling since I could remember. I don't remember the pinpoint moment. It could be like retroactively. I remember it as watching WCW and watching Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair, which would have happened in like 94, 95-ish. And I would have only been 1 or 2 years old. So maybe it's something I watched in 96 or 97 that I remember seeing first. But even I remember getting the WCW San Francisco Toy Company figures, like the Big Bubba Rogers, the Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Sting. I could go on and name all Vader, whomever. We could talk more about action figures later. But I remember getting those for Christmas and just like putting together my own wrestling cards and booking my own matches and doing these massive Royal Rumbles and all this other stuff with these toys. So that's, I guess, when I first became a fan of pro wrestling, but I knew I wanted to become a pro wrestler after watching the first season of Tough Enough in 2000, 2001.
Well, you mentioned action figures and playing with them and creating your cards, and I feel like we would have been best friends if we grew up at the same time because I was doing the same damn thing, Anthony.
Yeah, me too.
At that point, I would download. I hope this doesn't get me in trouble one day. I was downloading music on LimeWire.
The statute of limitations is gone. You're good.
Yeah, I mean, To be
We
fair,
all did it.
that website ruins more computers of mine than it made me happy at the end of the day. But I would download wrestling matches on there. Like they had like the stuff you couldn't get, WCW, ECW. I would spend hours to like download a 6 minute like WCW Saturday Night match. But then I would also download music, like theme music, and I would like burn them on a CD, and I had a little CD player, and I would play their entrances for my action figures back in the day. Oh yeah.
Yeah, Anthony, I think we did actually grow up during a similar time period. You mentioned 1994, which is the year that I was born. And I have to say, I feel like if we grew up near each other, like if we knew each other when we were growing up, we definitely would have been best friends, because I can relate as well to doing a lot of the same things. You mentioned the show Tough Enough, and some of the folks from Tough Enough, not even necessarily some of the winners from the seasons of Tough Enough that they did go on to be successful performers in the wrestling industry in their own right. So was there anything specific about that show, like anything about the training process or anything that they did that really clicked with you and made you say like, oh, okay, like I could do this?
Yeah, so I was only like 6, 7 years old in 2000, and I ended up falling in love. And my favorite childhood wrestler was Maven Huffman. And everyone thinks it's a joke or thinks that I'm just like taking the piss. Like, no, Maven was the man. He's the first person I ever saw be a normal, everyday regular person with a 9 to 5 job, and then I watched him become a WWF at the time, a WWF wrestler, WWF superstar. I saw him eliminate The Undertaker from the Royal Rumble. I watched him win championships in the company. And I think that was like the first time for me that the curtain was drawn back a little bit, and I saw how training was done. Oh, this is how you take a back bump. This is how you throw a punch. They didn't deep dive into like match structure or anything crazy like that. But that was my first taste of like seeing what a wrestling training looked like, because that was before YouTube. Now you can go on YouTube and you can look up how-to pro wrestling videos. But then like this was one of the first real ones. Like they had the Pro Wrestling Exposed thing that came out maybe a few years before. But this was the first time where like wrestling was the wrestling training and seeing the secrets of wrestling were treated respectfully and taken seriously.
Let me ask you about the wrestling training at the beginning. So like I always make this kind of comparison, like that when you start a new gym, you go to an Orange Theory or CrossFit, and it can be intimidating because you don't know anybody, you don't know what's going on. But like to train as a pro wrestler, right, for the very first time, like what goes through your mind when you walk through those doors for the first time?
All right, so my story is going to be way different than everyone's story is a bit different, but mine is, I think, a little more crazy. I found a wrestling school 7 minutes from my house when I was 13 years old.
Oh.
And my parents came and signed the waiver and allowed me to train. I'm still friends with the people that ran it to this day, but it was not the best like training I could have got. It taught me how to bump and how to hit the ropes. But other than that, fundamentally, I didn't learn much, but it did gain me a lot of connections and allow me to go to other places. And I started doing ring crew at some places that were close by. And that's how I met other people. And then finally, when I was 16, I decided I didn't want to wrestle and I wanted to just be a referee. And I began refereeing on indie shows because I knew enough of the basics to do that much. And, I knew a lot of the wrestlers at that point. So I began to do that. And then it was 2 years later when I was 18 is when I began training at Spike Dudley's Lockup Wrestling School under Ryan Waters, that I kind of began the transition of just being a referee to training to be a wrestler. But yeah, there's
When you talk,
sorry, there's like no.
that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was like no feeling the first time when I was 13. I feel like I completely like went around your question and just told you my life story. But to answer your question, I feel like more excited to get in the ring. And then I didn't really ever feel nervous walking into a wrestling school, because by the time I was going to that next school or training at that next place, I already had like a good rapport with whoever the trainer was or whoever the students were, that it was never like that I never had that first time in the gym type feeling.
Okay, let me ask you about the
You
referee
mentioned
thing. Oh no, go ahead, Julie. Go ahead.
that was going to be my exact same question. Go right ahead, Tony.
Well, no, I was gonna go with I'm personal like good friends with Mikey Spandex, who was the referee of Marquise Hamilton in NXT, and I know he got that contract. He went to WWE, and being a referee, it's like, oh shoot, you're on WWE. But when I talked to him, when I interviewed him, he wasn't happy with being that, and he wanted to be a pro wrestler. Like that's his thing, right? So was that kind of like the switch for you too, where you're like, well, I'm a referee, but like still kind of like pumping in my veins is being a pro wrestler, or how did you make the transition back?
I think it was just suggested that I was too tall to be a referee. 6'1", 6'2" with my shoes on. Not an ideal height. I don't think there's really any tall referees at this point on television or in WWE really. Mike Chioda would have been the tallest probably, and then before him was maybe like Nick Patrick, but everyone else was much shorter. We just suggested to try wrestling, and even when I was 18, when I made my wrestling debut, I still reffed for a whole nother year while I was wrestling. And a lot of places, like they did the transition. They called me the Revolution. That was my nickname. Yeah, pretty good, right? The Revolution, the whole reffing show.
I love that. Well, it's very unique too. It's a very unique thing to see, because that's not something that you really see a lot. People transitioning from a referee role or like a broadcast role into something else in front of the audience. So I love the concept of that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to have it all play out like live in front of an audience. Like they basically, and even to this day, like I started wrestling. I had my first match 2 weeks before I graduated high school. So anyone that's like a real fan of like the New England scene or just a fan of Anthony Greene in general, like you may have watched me completely grow up, like as an adult. Yeah. So this has been my entire adulthood life.
When you mentioned the New England scene, obviously I am a part of the New England scene as well, and I'm sure we've crossed paths with a lot of the same people. Who would you say? I know you mentioned the Lockup School of Wrestling, and you mentioned some of your trainers. Are there any folks in the New England scene, maybe either still wrestling right now, or even folks who have been retired, that you feel like you learned a lot from, or that you would really consider to be big influences in your career today?
Yeah, for sure. I have to say my first real trainer, which was H2O Ryan Waters. He still promotes shows to this day under Pro Wrestling Super Show. After him was probably like Matt Taven. And then later, as I grew older or grew up as a wrestler, I started training at the New England Pro Wrestling Academy. I would say Brian Fury played a huge part. Donovan Dijak, Mikey Webb, Scotty Slade. Anyone else that I really like looked up to or helped me? I would say from the New England scene, that was probably the gist. But then I also would watch like Warbeard Hansen, Ivar, and I'd watch like Tommaso and see their successes in Ring of Honor. And those were guys that from afar I looked up to. And then when I would see them, they would give me great feedback and always give me advice. So probably that group roughly. I'm sure there's others that I'm forgetting, and I hope they don't text me later and tell me how much they paid for it. But there've been far too many people in my life and in my career that have helped me. There's too many to thank. If I ever get put into any sort of Hall of Fame for some weird reason, I don't think I'd be able to thank everyone.
Let me bring in a few comments
to give one of those.
here.
Sure.
Oh no, go ahead. Well,
I was just going to say it's like a.
Yeah, it says, by the way, Mr. Greene is easy on the eyes. He's got that bad boy spicy look.
I like that.
Oh, you got fans. You got
Coach
fans,
C says
AG.
it rules.
Nice.
Coach C. He also says Maven got a YouTube channel nowadays, and his eyebrows are always on point.
Yes, I love his YouTube channel.
Spike Dudley was so cute and handsome in
So
tie dye.
cute and handsome in the tie-dye. Okay. Spike Dudley's got some fans on here too. I was just gonna say, it reminds me when you're mentioning all of these people that you have to thank, it reminds me like at the Golden Globes or the Oscars or something like that, when people win an award and their whole speech is just like a list of names, everybody that they have to thank, they're getting cut off. I'm like, that would be your speech. You'd have this.
Before I forget, thank you, Beyonce.
Yes, don't forget.
And so another question, while we're talking about, the training process, we kind of talking more about sort of like the technical side, but I want to switch over to the character side for a second, because you and I talked a little bit just on our own time in the past about character and how your character sort of changed and developed over the years. Where did you start, and then were there inspirations, things that happened to you along the way throughout your wrestling journey that sort of influenced your character development, or maybe it was like a light bulb moment for you in terms of like, oh, this is something that I want to incorporate into my performance?
Yes, this is going to be a long one, so hopefully you guys got the time.
You got time.
We're good.
It truly started as the Revolution Anthony Greene, the ref turned wrestler. Obviously, at some point, like, I want to kill that. No referee is ever going to be the heavyweight champion of a company. So I like alliteration, and I thought AG squared sounded cool. All good, Anthony Greene. Easy to chant. It's all good. It's all good. Fun, and I was a fun-loving baby face, good guy type character. So I thought it fit at the time. I'm 19, 20 years old. As I got older, I needed it clicked in some areas, but I needed something that would click overall. And I was always someone that wasn't afraid to like throw crap against the wall. So I tried being like a frat boy, and I called myself the big man on canvas. And our group were tagged Big Daddy Beluga, Brick Mass Stone. So we were called Alpha Sigma Sigma. And I stopped wearing wrestling gear. I wrestled in like cargo shorts and like silly like tank tops that said funny phrases. Did that for a little bit. That was like 2016, 2017 I did that. And I continued to do All Good Anthony Greene other places. And then nothing was clicking for me. Like I was wrestling at some pretty good places like the Beyonds and Limitless Wrestling. I was doing chaotic wrestling, all that stuff. But I wanted to like really get out there. I wanted to wrestle for PWG one day. I wanted to be able to be someone that Ring of Honor wanted, or AIW in Ohio, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like very frustrated about wrestling. Not big man on campus, big man on canvas.
Wow, that's clever.
So anyway,
sounds like a fun Saturday night, though.
It does sound like a fun.
Either way.
But where was I? Oh, so I was getting frustrated end of 2017, and I just needed something to happen for me. And I was in my group text, and we're suggesting stuff. I'm like, I'm done. I'm over it. Like, I'm just going to be a local yokel. I'm not going to take it seriously anymore. I'm not going to I'm not going to shoot for the moon anymore. And then I told myself, like, I'm going to give myself 1 year. I'm going to go all in on a character, and like whatever happens, happens. And I came up with the retrosexual Anthony Greene. And then everyone thought it was funny. They're, oh, well, what's the character going to do? What's this? What's that? How are you going to dress? What are you going to wear? Are you going to do this? And I remember I said this on a different interview that I did previously. I became the retrosexual Anthony Greene way before I was ready to. Like, I didn't have the gear for it. I basically didn't have anything that I knew I wanted to do, but I said, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it at all. And I just need to do it 100%. So I had like generic looking tights for the first maybe month until my custom gear came in. I wore normal Zubaz pants until my tearaways came in. I wore a satin jacket until my custom fake Ribera jacket came in. I had custom glasses made, and then the Platinum Honeys joined. And then by March, I would say the group was like, not the group, rather the full package with the group was put together fully, and it was like something I could sell. I could sell that to a TV company. I could sell that to a big independent company. You're not just getting Anthony Greene, the wrestler. You're getting this retro AG experience with you. So that's kind of where that started, and then it took maybe a few months for it to really start like kicking into high gear. Limitless Wrestling started using it. Beyond Wrestling started using it. I got 2 dark matches with Ring of Honor doing it. And then I did an Evolve tryout where I was chosen to have the match that day. And it was just, I did my job in that match. Nothing crazy happened, but I stayed in contact with Gabe Sapolsky, who was booking Evolve at the time. And then if that was December 2018, March 2019, I was booked again for Evolve last minute. And that night, you can look up the clip on YouTube. I think it's on my Instagram too. But in the middle of the match, we were in like this nightclub in Queens called La Boom. And there was a balloon in the ceiling. And when I was doing my walk and talk and crossbody, I grabbed the balloon and did the crossbody. Then I did like a suicide dive, and I passed the balloon to a person in the front row, and I got a standing ovation. 3 days later, I was offered an Evolve contract. And then Retro AG kind of evolved because I was a bad guy initially, a cool bad guy, which became the cool good guy. And then in Evolve, I became like a bad guy. And then a year after that, I got offered a contract with WWE, and I needed to figure out maybe like a more family-friendly version of what retrosexual was. But I still kept the majority of the look. But it was after I got released by WWE, I said I could either stay with this August Gray look, I could take a step back and be Retro AG again, or I can take a step forward and do something completely different. But I had no backup plan. I had no alternative, and that's because I was the alternative. And that's where full circle. A very long story to get to my punchline, but that's
right. But the punchline hits, though. Yes, it hits. Yes.
So you did mention the time that you spent with NXT, and the interesting thing about NXT for me as a viewer and someone that's been following it for a while, it seems like the culture and the presentation of NXT has changed quite a bit over the years, even from when you were there to a couple of years ago to now. When you were there, like, what were some major, maybe like long-term lessons or takeaways that you had from that experience? Or were there any people that you interacted during that time frame that were really influential to what you ended up doing afterwards as the alternative?
Man. Probably a few people I could mention. I would say Scotty Too Hottie was very influential. He was my first coach at the PC. He was very helpful the entire time. Ivar is another one. He broke his neck in September 2020. And I was friends with him before that, obviously. So like, I was there with him days after he broke his neck. And then during his entire process of coming back, like, I was the person that worked with him in ring to get him to be cleared to come back to WWE. So like watching his struggles and his frustration, and also knowing him for so long, and even just as a fan watching him be like the Duke, Don Chesterfield, or watching him be Handsome Johnny and then become the brand new bad, watching his evolutions. Or Tommaso Ciampa is another great example. He started out as Thomas Penmanship. His character was that he had good handwriting. And then he was in, within a year or two of him being a trained wrestler, he got hired by WWE and he went to OVW and he was signed for 7 months, I think, or 9 months. And then he got released. And then he made a name for himself as the prodigy Tommaso Ciampa. Then he became the Sicilian psychopath, and continued to reinvent himself until WWE needed him again. And I see those guys take those paths. And myself, I was under contract for, I think you can call it 10 months total. Seeing Tommaso basically having that same first run almost and then reinventing himself, I thought it was time for something new, and I didn't want to go backwards. Just want to continue to push forwards. So probably those three. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. Like, I always had really good conversations with a lot of people there. Like Matt Bloom was always great. Talking to Road Dogg was always helpful. But I would say Scotty 2 Hotty. Maybe add Sanjay Dutt to that list as well. Those guys, and specifically watching the careers of like Ivar and Tommaso Ciampa and seeing like, all their trials and tribulations and then seeing their successes now. I mean, Ivar just won the tag team titles in the main event in his hometown, and Tommaso's the other tag team champion on SmackDown. So like they're doing just fine. So I know as long as I continue the same route, I could do just as well as long as I want to.
Now, Anthony, you've been in the ring with many notable people. One I want to kind of bring up, of course, when I named this podcast, I wanted to pay tribute to who I believe is the greatest of all time, and that's Sting. Yeah. It's the Dropping Down from the Rafters podcast, because I want to bring that excitement back, the excitement I felt as a kid watching Sting drop down from the Rafters and beat up Hogan. So I know you've had an interaction with the Stinger. Can you just kind of elaborate on that whole experience?
So no one will believe this, but that 100% happened. That was all ad lib. I had no idea what was about to happen. I was rolling out of the ring after losing live on Dynamite in Rochester, New York. And as I'm rolling out, Eddie Kingston stops me with his foot and he kicks me back in the ring. I'm like, am I taking their finish again? I don't know what's about to happen. And then Sting just grabs me. And I'm in my head, I'm like, is he going to give me like that back fist? Or is he going to sweep my legs and put me in the Scorpion Deathlock? No, he turns me around and he hooks me for the death drop. And you can see in the video, if I'm upside down, my head is looking at I don't know if it's called a Titantron. I think that's a WWE phrase, but the big screen. And I can see myself in the move. And I'm going nuts. I'm like, this is the coolest day of my life. It felt like an eternity. What I didn't realize is that video is on like a delay, like by half a second, maybe a second. So I'm looking at myself, admiring myself in this move. And I watch it back and I hear Tony Schiavone go, "It's Sting!" And I'm going nuts. As I'm looking at myself, he's dropping me. I don't have time to tuck my chin because I'm like looking straight up at myself. So I hit my head so hard, completely my fault. But that's my little tidbit about that. And Sting's the man. We didn't really talk much that day, but I ended up seeing him. So that was September 2021. In December 2022, we ended up on an indie show together in New Jersey. It was Simon Dean, Nova's retirement show. And they brought Sting in to do a signing and talk on the mic, whatever, during like the intermission time or whatever. I went up to him, asked him if he remembered. I didn't ask if he remembered me, but I told him we worked together. And he was very polite about it. And then I told him, like, oh, I'll see you next month in Japan for Great Muda's retirement show. And he was like, yeah, sure, see you there. Like, he did not believe me. Like, I was like, this guy's crazy. And then anyway, a month later in Japan, I'm doing push-ups where me and a few guys are doing push-ups before the show. And I pop up and I see Sting. And he was like, it's good to see you, man. And he gave me a huge hug. So I got a photo with him in December, but I got another one with him in January, which is really cool. And he was just so nice that entire day. After my match, he goes, "Sounds great out there. How's the crowd? Is it warm? Oh, that was awesome." Like, he couldn't have been nicer after. But I remember just that December where he was like, "Yeah, see you there." Maybe he wasn't thinking that. It's the way it came off to me. I could be totally wrong. And then, like, the surprise and almost like happiness on his face when he saw me the next month. It was very cool. It's probably because he saw a familiar face, if anything. Someone that he saw a month ago and like, oh, I'm in this foreign country and this guy I saw a month ago is here too. Like, that's pretty cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Brian,
Now,
welcome
AG
back. He does say Sting is very cool. Welcome back.
Hernandez.
Hey, Brian, how are you? Welcome back, Brian. Yeah, Sting is the man, plain and simple, for sure. Yeah.
I was just going to add, AG, you already know this, but I had a similar interaction a couple of months ago at an independent show where Sting was also there, just addressing the crowd and doing a signing and a meet and greet and things like that. And I did as well make a point to go up to him backstage to introduce myself and chat a little bit, because in my brain, I'm like, how many times in my life am I going to be backstage at a show with Sting in full attire? Like, this is probably not something that's going to happen often. So when I found sort of like a window of opportunity, I went up and chatted with him and introduced myself. And you could just tell he was such a sweet man. And I feel like that was one of those beautiful moments, and I'm sure you felt similarly in your experience as well, when you meet one of your heroes and they just turn out to be like such a humble and kind person, and it makes you feel like, you know, watching them growing up and idolizing them growing up, it makes it feel like this you know, sort of like, I guess, a feeling of validation, like, oh yes, like they were the person that I thought that they were, that I was idolizing this whole time. And I wanted to jump really quickly because you had also mentioned your first interaction and then seeing him in Japan. And so I wanted to talk about Japan a little bit, because you and I have talked about this just like in our own time as friends. But I kind of wanted to dig into, like, how did you get the opportunity to go in the first place? And then how did that sort of evolve into, you know, everything that you've been doing now with Pro Wrestling Noah and sort of traveling back and forth multiple times this year? How did that all come about for you?
Yeah, so I got released by WWE. Sad. But no, honestly, I was told in a phone call with one of the coaches, like, this is what's going to be best for you, and just like make a name for yourself on the indies and do some stuff, and like, we'll want you back, more or less. Make us want you back or need you. So that night that I got released, I honestly didn't even have time to be sad, because within 6-7 hours of no longer working for the company, I was told I was going to go to Japan. That was through a really good friend of mine, Ika Menjiro. He was my tag partner one time on NXT and a handful of times on 205 Live. He was like, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to wrestle in Japan." He said, "For who?" I told him, "Pro Wrestling Noah." He called the president in front of me right then and there, and it was basically set in stone. It was still bad, like COVID lockdown in Japan, and they weren't allowing new visas or anything at that point. So we had to wait for the COVID to kind of clear out a little bit, and then allow new visas for small businesses and students to start back up, which wasn't for almost a year, just under a year. And they had a list of foreigners that were meant to go over before me. So I went for my first tour in July 2022. It was meant to be a 16-day tour, and it turned into 2 months. Literally within being there for 24 hours, I was told, like, "Oh no, we're going to keep you until September 2nd if you're willing to." And there was no second thought whether or not I was going to stay or not. Like, I had to do it, which ended up being like a great experience for me. I got to wrestle in Korakuen Hall 5 times just that first tour. I was put in the N1 Victory Tournament, which is their version of the New Japan G1. I got to wrestle one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, Go Shiozaki. I got to have a singles match with Masato Tanaka. I got to wrestle Iho del Dr. Wagner Jr., one of my NXT coaches, Hideki Suzuki. I got to wrestle Kojima and team with Kojima. I got to wrestle at the famous Nippon Budokan. Like my first Japanese experience, honestly, short of wrestling at the Tokyo Dome in my first tour, I don't think it could have been a better first tour for me. And then after that, I don't think they really had anything for me right away. And then, because a lot of wrestling is just kind of like, what's the phrase I'm looking? It's like a casting call almost. Like they're looking for something specific, and I fit a role for them. And in January they brought me back, and I joined the faction, the Good Looking Guys. Month later, I got to wrestle at the Tokyo Dome in front of over 30,000 fans. That's pretty sick. And then from basically January 2023 till now, I've been full time with Pro Wrestling Noah.
Okay, Japan. That's like my wife's and I's like dream vacation to go over there, and you get to go over there to wrestle, which is just really awesome. Like, I know crowds here in the States, they differ from town to town and city to city and state to state. How would you describe the change in like kind of the atmosphere of the crowd experience in Japan versus maybe like what you're more used to here in the United States?
So honestly, my first tour was pretty rough because they weren't allowed to make any verbal noise. And there were smaller crowds, like people had to sit a chair apart. So the only noise you would ever hear is a clap, unless you did something really impressive, which I happened to do a handful of times, where they would gasp, but you would never hear them chant anything. My first time hearing them chant anything was crazy. It was Korakuen Hall, February 2023. The Tokyo crowd and the Osaka crowd are my personal favorites, especially Tokyo, Shinjuku Face, Korakuen Hall. Those two are probably my favorite venues in that area. There's just something about a packed Korakuen Hall and them chanting. There are times where I'll make a point to go to the top of the Korakuen Hall building and watch. Like if I'm on early, I will watch the rest of the matches live just because the atmosphere is like that incredible. But the crowds really aren't that much different. I would say they're maybe, I don't want to use the word more respectful because I don't deal with many non-respectful crowds in America, but I guess they just watch a little more intently and they treat it a bit more like a sport. Yeah, that's probably the only real difference. Other than that, it's still very similar, but it's definitely a different vibe at the same time.
Okay.
Jumping off of Tony's.
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Tony.
Well, I was gonna say.
I
guess I'm jumping off of my question as well too. Go ahead, Jolie.
I was just gonna kind of add to that because in our spare time, Anthony, we've talked a little bit about like some of the cultural differences between the U.S. and Japan in general. So I was gonna ask you to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more. Maybe sort of like some shocking cultural differences that you experienced going from the U.S. to Japan or the first time, both in society, just like the civilian society, and also like within the wrestling community as well. AG is a wealth of knowledge. I happen to agree with this statement.
Stop it, Coach C. He's just trying to get me to do his no, Coach C, really good kid, incredibly talented, very good commentator. I've not heard much of his ring announcing. I know he used to manage, but his commentary is top tier. Recently, we did an event for Kojo's Toy World. We did a toy drive, and last minute he needed to be thrown into a different spot, and I gave him the rundown one time, and he absolutely nailed it. So just quick shout out to Coach C. Very good kid. I like him a lot. But so cultural differences in society. So one, I, to be honest, don't know how to use the train systems in Boston whatsoever. But the train system in Japan is so easy and it's always on time. Like if it's late by a minute, like then there's a problem. Like that's how perfect and like perfectly timed everything is there. Um, One thing I find interesting is in Tokyo, you stand on the left side of the escalator, you walk on the right side, but in Osaka, it's opposite. And everyone's just very respectful. The one phrase I probably use more than anything is "simasen," which is like "excuse me." But you'll hear that whether it's like "sorry, I'm in your way," excuse me, or "I need something," excuse me, or "sorry, I messed that up," excuse me. Like "simasen" is almost used for everything. Also, your waiter or waitress will never come up to you. You have to yell "simasen" to get their attention, or they're not walking up to you. And it seems like I remember the first time I did it or heard it. It's like incredibly rude. It seems rude, but that's just how the culture is. Wrestling wise, I've noticed like I actually think personally, maybe this is a hot take, it's something that lacks a bit here. There is way more respect for the elders in pro wrestling. Like you could be the world champion of a company in Japan, and if there's someone that has more experience than you, you're gonna go out of your way to go up to them and like say hello to them. I think that lacks here a bit. Or like you could be the most famous Japanese wrestler, and if there's someone that's less famous but more experienced, you're still going to show respect to them, which I think is very cool. And then they hit much harder than they do. So that part I don't like as much, but I've gotten used to it. It's toughened me up for sure. But yeah, I would say those are probably like the biggest differences. It's also been very cool wrestling in a 20-foot ring for Noah, compared to
Ooh.
18 here. I don't really. I've maybe only
Ooh.
20-foot ring in America for an independent wrestling company. But usually it's like 16 or 18 foot. I've wrestled in a 14-foot ring before, and I refed in a 12-foot ring once for a little person.
Oh gosh.
Micro wrestling show.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we were talking about fans and the experience and stuff like that. And I feel like I should bring in this clip right here. Let me bring this one in here. So this is your return here.
Yeah.
Love the energy here, right? Okay. And like your facial expression, like you can tell, like this is like it feels so surreal. It looks like it's so surreal to you. And I mean, could you just describe this moment to us?
So yeah, so there's gonna be a really funny moment right here where this older man, he doesn't let go of my hand. He's like, "Welcome back. You better go kick his ass and win that belt." I'm like, all right, Grandpa. This woman right here, that's Ace. Yeah, this was like wild. So fun fact, the month before this, it was like an unannounced show, and I got the day before, and three heels came out to my song, and they thought it was gonna be me. And when they came out, the crowd was bullshit. So then this time they also thought it wasn't going to be me again. If you watch at the beginning, if you want to rewind it at the once we're done, but if you start at the very beginning and the music hits, you can see on the left side front, the music starts. You'll see a guy in glasses. The woman gets excited. He goes, "No, it's not. This isn't it. It's not him." And then when it happens, I got so pumped up. The first thing I think I say is "Oh F yeah." You could probably see me say it. Yeah. And then right here, I'm about to cry.
Yeah, you can tell. You're holding
You can see it in your eyes.
I thought about walking back through the curtain because I was on the verge of tears. Made me cry. But then it kind of like settled in, like, oh no, like I'm back now. Like we're gonna do this. And then the smile, it changed to a smile. But yeah, probably one of my all-time favorite moments in pro wrestling. And I think I've done some pretty cool stuff, but this is definitely in the top.
I mean, it feels like it just doesn't get much better than this, right? This is like kind of like the stamp of approval or something almost to like, like that you're on the right track, that people really do love your craft.
Yeah, well, one thing that it was kind of like a little secret that I was on the show. Like this was unannounced. Like I was unannounced completely, but the show was called Undeniable. And this was when I was using the moniker. He went from reliable to undeniable. Um,
Oh, so it's kind of like a nice little teaser.
little bit, just a little bit.
Little bit of a teaser for those that didn't know you were going to be there. This reminds me a lot. So when I was doing ring announcing a couple months ago in Florida for CCW, I was lucky enough to announce the return of Rich Swann
Oh,
on
cool.
at their show, and it was a very similar kind of experience where like he went out in the crowd and he actually went through his entire entrance music. He went through the entire song just going out in the crowd and dancing and greeting people. And watching this video, this seems like a very similar experience of like just being really immersed in the crowd and being happy to see everyone and everybody wanting to interact with you.
Yeah.
So
At the end
that's
of the show, after the match, I actually got on the mic and obviously thanked everyone. And I made a point to say, like, I didn't leave the building until every person that wanted to, like, say hello to me did. So I made sure I sat by the ring and anybody that wanted like a picture with me that night, like I made sure I took one with them.
That's awesome.
and
Brian
that's
has
so
a question.
special.
Oh, sorry. He
Ooh.
wants to know if you had any wild nights in Roppongi. I don't know if I'm saying that correct.
Roppongi.
Roppongi.
I've had some fun nights in Roppongi, none of which I'm willing to talk about on this
There
podcast.
you go. There you go.
So now that you're spending a little bit of time in the States, I know you have a lot of bookings coming up in January into February. Am I correct?
Yeah. My last booking in America, I think, is going to be February 2nd in New Bedford, Massachusetts for Live Pro Wrestling's Man of Steel. Yeah.
Okay. And that being said, obviously you've been in the business since you were 13 years old. You've been a lot of places. You've stepped toe to toe with a lot of people. Something that I always like to ask people on the podcast, is there anyone, they don't even necessarily have to be on the indies, but anybody anywhere that maybe you have your eye on that you haven't stepped toe to toe with yet, that you would like to use this opportunity to call out?
Ooh. Wow. I mean, my dream match is AJ Styles. I think
Oh, that's a good one.
he's the greatest current in-ring professional wrestler. One of the greatest of all time. Definitely on my Mount Rushmore of best pro wrestlers. The closest thing to Shawn Michaels, who is the perfect pro wrestler. AJ Styles, if Shawn is one, AJ Styles is 1A. But yeah, AJ Styles was probably like the one guy that if I could wish any match to come to fruition, it would be me versus the Phenomenal One.
Now,
Let's
over your
manifest
year,
it, 2025.
yeah, oh yeah, we do need to make that happen. Yes, quickly too. I think AJ's winding down here, but let's make it happen. I wonder if he'll do. I don't know. A lot of these guys seem to do a lot of like indie runs as well too. Once their kind of like careers has come to
So,
an end.
what makes me believe it's a possibility is this past July, I was with him while I was in Japan. He wrestled Naomichi Marufuji for Pro Wrestling Noah, and I was there for it. I got to spend 2 days with him and talk to him, and I watched it. That's another situation where
Wow.
into the crowd to watch his match live. And they tore the house down. Insane. Naomichi Marufuji and Go Shiozaki are my two favorite Japanese wrestlers of all time. And I got to watch my favorite Japanese wrestler wrestle my favorite American wrestler live at Nippon Budokan, which was insane.
It feels like your life has been one hell of a roller coaster ride, Anthony.
It's been something. Timothy Thatcher says peaks and valleys.
Right?
There's definitely been probably equal amount of valleys, but an equal amount of peaks too. So I can't complain too much.
When you've hit those valleys, how hard was it at times maybe to come back to those peaks?
I mean, I don't know if I have an answer for that one. I feel like if you so Ken Doan gave me really good advice that he heard from I think Hacksaw Jim Duggan, which he basically said like when you're up, you're up. When you're down, you're down. But if you stick around long enough, you'll find your way back up. So, quote.
Something that I always like to think about as well. So I have a very young nephew, and one of the movies that we watched together is the Sing movie. And there's a quote in that movie, and it says, "There's only one way to go, and that is up."
I
And
like
so
that.
that's something similarly in situations, and I think it's normal just obviously in life, but in entertainment and in the wrestling business as well, there's going to be some times where you're really booked and really busy and you've got a lot of content to share and it feels like there's a lot going on. And then there's times where maybe it feels a little bit quieter and you're kind of inside yourself saying like, okay, like I need to kind of stir up some interest again. And it's those moments I like to kind of think of that quote as well. And we actually had a couple months back another guest on the show, Dave Sturcio, who is one of the promoters for Fight Factory in New Jersey. And something that he said that similarly resonated with me was kind of in those moments, in those valleys, sometimes you're going to get told no. Sometimes you're going to reach out to promoters and you're going to hear no a lot, or you're not going to hear anything back at all. But in those moments where you hear no, finding a way to create your own yes. And so that's something that I like to keep in mind. And I think watching your career is as well, and seeing how, I know you mentioned earlier, for example, your experience getting released from WWE, but then it was like, okay, well, I'm going to take this opportunity and I'm going to reinvent myself and I'm going to go to Japan and I'm going to live out this dream. So that's something that I really just wanted to throw out. I really personally admire about you is your ability to reinvent yourself. And that's something that I think we see from a lot of the greatest pro wrestlers that have withstood the test of time over many years is, they always know how to reinvent themselves and kind of create buzz again over and over again.
100%. I mean, I think Chris Jericho has probably done it better than anybody else. Like going back to Lionheart, Chris Jericho, to his heel run in WCW, to becoming the Millennium Guy in WWF, to getting released and becoming, Save Us 222 and everything he did along the way, to still now nearly over 30 years into his career, still a world champion for a television wrestling company, I think is insane, and awesome for him.
Now,
absolutely, he's one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, well, yeah, I love Jericho. Before we wrap up, I know we did learn something about you before we started this podcast. So you are quite the wrestling collector as well, too.
Well,
we even learned that you have an Instagram that neither me or Julie knew about as well, too.
I got 2 new followers for this podcast.
Yes, you did.
Started. Heck yeah. What would you guys like to know? I could tell you.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've dabbled in collecting from time to time. There's times I'm totally into it. There's times I sell stuff. And so give us a little history about kind of like maybe like your first little thing of when you realize maybe, okay, I'm a collector right now.
Oh, so that was probably there was like a set of WWE, WWF, when they became Jakks Pacific, they were like Raw magazine figures. So like it looked like it looked like a Raw magazine, but there was a figure to match it. So like there was a Hardy Boys set. And I remember specifically asking my mom if I could get like 2 of each, because I wanted one to open and play with, but I wanted one to keep in the package. So that's probably where it started, but then it really kicked in when the Jakks Classic Superstars came out, the black and gold packaging. The first set was like Andre, Taker, Shawn, Brett, I think, Ultimate Warrior as well. When those came out, I bought that whole set in full. And I was like, this is probably the only set of these Legends figures that are ever going to come out. And then they made series 2 and series 3 and series 4. And at some point I stopped collecting the entire series and just collecting the ones that I wanted. But that is probably where it really started. And then in like 2016, I started collecting like the Hasbros, and now I have all the Hasbro figures. And at this point, I collect a lot less. It has to be something that really intrigues me, and I like to collect action figures of people that I've wrestled or my friends. And
Ooh.
I'll do. I literally bought 2 figures off Ringside Collectibles a couple days ago that showed up yesterday. Or I brought my Spike Dudley figure to get signed by Spike at the Kojo's Toy World toy drive, because he was one of my trainers and I wanted to get my classic superstar signed by him. Or next weekend, I'm going to be on a show with Chris Statlander, who I've wrestled and who I consider a friend. So I want to get her to sign her AEW figure for me. Maybe she'll say no. I don't know. Probably not. But like, to me, that's the coolest thing. Like seeing my friends get action figures and like getting to meet wrestler or getting to wrestle wrestlers that I have action figures of and getting them to sign toys as well. I've got some very cool rare ones from Japan, and I've gotten them to sign the figures for me as well. Yeah, I'm just a big dork. I don't know. I also please.
I was just going to say, is there anything in your collection that you consider to sort of be like your prized possession? Or is there anything that like you were dying to get your hands on, you were looking for it everywhere, and then like you finally found it somewhere, you were so excited about it?
Yes.
What's that holy grail? What's that holy grail, Anthony?
I got 2 of them. It's either my mint on card green Hasbro 123 Kid, which I have signed by him, or my Hasbro mail away Hulk Hogan. Very tough to get.
Okay.
Probably those 2, and then my personal holy grail for myself, as a gift, my friend Chris Sullivan, he runs Lucky Pro Wrestling. He gifted me with a PSA Mint 10 of my own WWE trading card. So I have.
Did you sign it? Did you sign it?
No, I did not sign my card for me. I value the card if I signed it. My signature is absolute chicken scratch. I would ruin it. Anytime someone asks me to sign like a T-shirt specifically, like I hate doing it because T-shirts are already tough to sign and my signature is bad.
Right.
So I'm just scribbling on your T-shirt. Like, if anyone ever wants me to shirt, just ask me for an 8x10. I'll just give you one at that point. Like, I'd rather sign a piece of paper than sign another T-shirt.
It's true. I see the poor wrestlers and they've got the shirt pulled out and they're like trying to sign it.
Gotta help me. In Japan, it's pretty easy because we have like handlers to like help you like stretch it out and make it tight for you to sign. But
that's nice.
Oh, it's rough. It's a rough one to do. By the way, compliment my Christmas sweater, Hao Ming Christmas sweater. Pretty cool. Very comfortable.
That is awesome.
Got a little.
It does look very cozy.
It is, especially on these cold New England nights.
Especially now. Tony's lucky because he is based down in Atlanta now, but both of us in Massachusetts are freezing. I think it was like 5 degrees here last I checked the other day, or something along those lines. So it is bitter cold right now.
I have a question. I got a question. All right. I was on the weather app and it said it was 19 degrees. It said 19 degrees, but it said feels like 10. Who is the feels like guy? Who decides?
That's a good
Who decides?
That's a great question. I would like to know how you get into that field of being the feels like guy.
I want to be the feels like guy.
Because if it feels like it should just be it. Like, don't tell me it's 27, but it feels like 7. Like, then just tell me it's 7, right?
Yeah. I don't need the scientific number. I want to know what I'm gonna hate.
Right.
what it
Okay.
feels like. And then I want to know, what are the qualifications to be the feels like guy? And if I'm qualified, I'd be interested in knowing what the salary for the feels like guy is, because
I'm
that
sure it's
seems like
pretty
it could be a
good.
pretty lucrative.
My
Yeah.
theory is the feels like guy is wearing just a robe, all right, and he goes out in the morning
I
to
could
grab the morning paper, and he goes outside and he grabs the paper and goes, feels like 8 degrees out, and then he walks inside and he texts the weather app, and that's how they decide what the feels like
That's how
is.
they know.
That's my theory.
And
So
now we know who it is
so if
because he's the only guy getting the paper still. So now we know how to locate this guy too.
It's gonna be a YouTube or Instagram clip. I talk all this great wrestling stuff, but we're talking about the feel like guy for the last
Yeah.
5
Well, that being said, if for whatever reason you ever are looking for some sort of like side hustle outside of your very successful wrestling career, I think we know what your side hustle is going to be now.
I would be a great feels like guy. I also I'd be a great bowler.
Okay.
Oh, do you bowl? Like, do you bowl? Have you bowled in any sort of league or anything? That it was just something that you like to do.
I bowled in a league when I was really young, like maybe 7, 8 years old. But I played candlepin bowling, which is something only Julie would know what that is, unless you're from New England.
Yeah. Yes.
So other than that, no one knows what candlepin bowling is, but it's really skinny pins and really small bowling balls, and you get to throw it 3 times instead of 2, and it doesn't rack. So you can just be knocking down, you can just be hitting rogue pins that will fall into other pins. It's chaotic. It's a chaotic game.
It is very chaotic, but it's true. When you mention the narrowness of the pins and the balls, that's what makes it tricky.
Yes, I've gotten very good at 10-pin bowling. You can ask anyone in Japan that I've bowled with. I've smoked every single one of them. I don't think I'm a pro, but I'm above average. I'm better than your average bowler for sure. But I think if I ever have to quit wrestling, bowling would probably be my next avenue for professional sport.
Okay.
That's also a very
it probably
interesting
pays less than the feels good guy, though.
Feels good guy.
Probably a little bit less than the. It's an interesting idea, though. I don't know if this exists or not. Somebody in the pro wrestling business that has a bowling gimmick. Is this something that either of you have ever seen?
So I've actually created an entire character based on a bowl, not for me, but just for funsies. It was the original. It was the original Perfect 10. And he throws nothing but strikes.
Oh.
Get it? Throws nothing but strike. And his finish.
I like this idea.
His finishing move is the 7-10 split-legged moonsault.
Okay.
Copyright.
That's very clever.
Copyright. Trademark.
Yeah, trademark.
Yes.
Yes, this is copyrighted by Anthony Greene. It'd be very interesting to see, because I know that you've helped train some up-and-coming wrestlers in varying capacities as well. It'd be interesting to see if there's ever anybody that comes along that you give the blessing to transfer this gimmick over. I would love to see it come to fruition in real life.
I would love someone to want to be the bowling guy or my other character, Chris P. Crust.
Crispy crust.
And the P stands. Yeah, he's a pizza delivery guy or girl, woman, whatever. Could be anything. But yeah, Chris P. Crust, and the P stands for pizza.
Okay,
I think
so if you're
you'll be the most popular person in the locker room.
Yeah. If you're an up-and-coming wrestler in the New England area and you want to connect with Anthony Greene and get his blessing to become one of these characters, that is something that I would love to see.
Please. I would love there to be a Crust and a Perfect 10.
Yes, and if anybody out there uses those names, December 23rd, 9:08 p.m., we are live. It is recorded on YouTube. So don't go stealing Anthony Greene's ideas.
Please.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else that you would like to touch on, Julie, before we wrap this up for this evening.
Well, something that I always like to ask before we do wrap things up, I know we mentioned, Anthony, you're going to be home until early February and your schedule's filling up very quickly. You're in very high demand. So I always like to ask, where can the people see you next and where can they find you on social media?
Okay, cool. The next place you can see me, I got one more match in the year 2024. I am going to be in Worcester, Massachusetts for Beyond Wrestling's Heavy Lies the Crown, and I'm going to go one-on-one against pop star Becca B3CCA.
Oh,
Yeah, how exciting. And then ring in the new year, January 3rd. I will be at Pro Wrestling Super Show against DJ Powers. And then on the 4th of January, I'll be going to Poughkeepsie, New York, wrestling at the legendary Mid Hudson Civic Center for the debut event of ACW Awesome Championship Wrestling, where I'll be going one-on-one with former WCW, ECW, TNA star Crowbar, formerly Devon Storm. Matt Riddle's on that show. Nick Nemeth is on that show. Thomas Latimer, NWA World Champion, will be defending the title against Tommy Dreamer. Enzo Amore is going to be there. There's going to be a massive Rumble, the Poughkeepsie Rumble, to crown the first ever Awesome Championship Wrestling champion. Vic Delicious and Hale Collins are putting that event on. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait for that. And then, man, the month of January is pretty busy. I just got announced for 2 Rebel Spirit events. On the first one, I think it's the 11th of January, I'll be wrestling Miles Hawkins. That is a first-time singles bout. And then I'll also be on the end of the month as well, where Donovan Dijak will be making his Rebel Spirit debut. I'm really good at shilling. I'm just going to keep it going. We're flowing right now.
Yes,
you're great. You're doing great.
Limitless Wrestling on July 12th. That's in Herman, Maine. And then 1 week later on January 18th, they'll be back in Yarmouth, Maine. I will be on both of those events in some capacity. Maybe I'll be on commentary. Maybe I'll be main eventing for the title. Who knows? I don't. But that Herman show is going to be pretty awesome. There's only 80 tickets left, or less than 80 tickets at this point. And it will be the Limitless Wrestling debut of your broski, my broski, Matt Cardona, and they just announced Smart Mark Sterling is going to be there, and former Ring of Honor original and New England legend, the Hurricane John Walters, is going to be there as well. He's someone I've always wanted to step in the ring with. So if there's another thing we could put in the universe, Randy Carver, Limitless Wrestling, January 12th, I would like to wrestle Hurricane John Walters. I don't know if you already have something planned for him, but if not, I want to be the guy to do it. So let's make that happen as well. If you guys, whoever's listening today, tweet at Limitless Wrestling and let them know you want to see Anthony Greene versus John Walters and make my New England dream match come true. Please. He's the one guy I think left that's a possible person to wrestle that I haven't. So let's do that. Let's make that one a reality.
All right, we need to clip this one and definitely tag everybody and resend this out. Let's make it happen.
Tag some folks.
And other than that, I do want to say you can follow me on social media. I am on X. You can see me Zeet on X at alternative_AG. I'm also on Instagram, the alternative AG. And if you want to see a little bit of my wrestling and a little bit of my life in Japan, you can look up, I think it's The Alternative AG on YouTube, where I post a vlog maybe once or twice a month. I just recently did a 10,000 calorie challenge with Irish.
I saw that, yes.
Yes. With Irish wrestler Mila Grace. She's currently with Marigold, and she's wrestled for NXT UK. I've done that same challenge previously as well with Jack Morris. You can see me succeed and fail all at the same time. I think it's a pretty entertaining vlog, so give that a look. I'm filming stuff currently for my Home for the Holidays vlog, so that'll be a lot of fun too. But yeah, check it all out. There's stuff from America. There's a lot of stuff from Japan, mostly stuff from Japan. really, really cool stuff on there. And if you do happen to check it out, please comment and let me know that you saw it from this very podcast. But yeah, I think that's enough shilling for now. So I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. Wow, you got an action-packed January. It's glad to hear, because a lot of people, it's like, we start off the new year. Most people don't want to get back into the game till like the end of January and February, and it seems like you're hitting it full steam right away.
Oh man, I have a very, very busy January, because I didn't even mention I have like a seminar coming up, and then I also run weekly wrestling classes every Wednesday with Donovan Dijak at the New England Pro Wrestling Academy. So yeah, one final one. If you want to be a pro wrestler, the New England Pro Wrestling Academy is open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and you can train with me and Donovan Dijak every Wednesday from 6:30 to 9 p.m.
Well, awesome.
Drop dates are possible as well if you're already a trained wrestler, just want to come by.
Very cool. Very cool. Julie, can you match what Anthony has going on in January? Because I can't.
Well, I probably cannot. Anthony set the bar very high.
Very high, yes.
But I can tell you a couple of things so far, and more TBD. I'll hopefully be able to share at a later date. As Anthony mentioned, I'm going to be at the 2 Rebel Spirit shows in January as well, doing ring announcing. Those are Saturday, January 11th. That's in Marlborough, Massachusetts, at our home Tackle Box Brewing Company. And then again on Friday, January 24th, that is at Timber Yard Brewing Company in East Brookfield, Massachusetts. And as AG mentioned, that is also going to be the Rebel Spirit debut of Donovan Dijak, which I am super excited for. And then I'm also going to be making my debut as the ring announcer for Fight Factory Wrestling. That's coming in early 2025. The date is going to be announced soon. I will not share until the promoters come forward and they finalize that and share that information. But I will be promoting it more on social media as we have more information to come. And again, hope to return to CCW sometime early 2025. I will share more information about my travels once I have that available, set in stone as well. You can follow me on social media. I'm most active on Instagram, and that is at The Crown Jewels. Crown is with an E at the end. It's the old English spelling. That's just how we roll here.
And for us here on Tone and Entertainment, we're taking a nice little week break, but when we return, it's going to be more Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling here in Georgia. It's going to be more Action Pro Wrestling. It's going to be more Deep South Wrestling. It's going to be, I said Action Wrestling here in Georgia. And I don't know, maybe a few more surprises as well. Plus, we'll be heading out to Fight Factory in February as well, too. And while we're here, let's go ahead and announce our first guest for January of 2025. She was my first guest of 2024. It was her very first podcast. And on that podcast, she said, I want to win a championship this year, and she's gone out. She's won 2 championships this year. So Calientita from Texas will be joining me here on the podcast on Sunday, January 5th at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. So we're definitely excited to talk about her 1-year journey in accomplishing not only those goals, but just a whole other lot of crazy stuff she has going on in Texas as well, too. So that's what we got going on. Anthony, Julie, thank you both so much for joining me here tonight.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Tony, as always.
Absolutely. And Anthony, keep up the great work. Julie, we haven't announced anything, but we got a few ideas swirling around for some more shows to start the new year as well, too.
Absolutely.
So guys, we will be back in 2025. So if you haven't already, guys, make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can stay tuned in here to Tone and Entertainment for future videos.
Subscribe to the channel. Do it. Go now. Do it now.
Yay.
I think we're